Well, let's talk a little bit more about agents, individual agents. And at Compass, you have the best of the best. Some of them, I'm sure, can be very high maintenance, I should say. How you deal with that? And I see that you have quite a few private offices within
Yes.
your office where agents have their own, maybe just something arranged for their team, for example. How do you pick and choose who gets what?
Well, that's always based on, like, the real world is always based on production, all right? And in the sales world, I was always in sales. Many people, there was that number one agent versus the 100th agent, or the 100th salesperson. Did that make the person that sat at 100 bad or inept? No. It gave them something to focus on, where they needed to go. Being number one is always tough because you're always at this threshold. But I'm a big sports person and I follow sports. I don't play it like I used to, but when I watch,
Oh yes, you do. You are on your bicycle.
Well, yes,
making tens and tens.
Well, that's true, and that's a good thing. But I look at sport athletes, male or female, it doesn't really matter. But the mindset and the success rate, the failure rate. I always say to my children, to my agents. Sometimes my agents are my children. It's really failure brings success. There's very few stories where someone just snapped their fingers and they made it. Most stories, if you look at them, there are people that struggled to get to the top. There's always a struggle. It never stops. And, it's really life. And I did this. This came about when I was riding a bike. And I remember one of my mentors, who's no longer in real estate, he's somewhere in Spain now running around or bicycling around. He was a young guy, but he retired. And he would always tell me, Ed, when you're on your bike doing that 100-mile ride, it's a ride. It's not a race. And I thought about that, and I'm like, it's a ride, it's not a race. And I used to ride my bike going, oh my God, I got 40 more miles to go. This is not a race, it's a ride. Enjoy the fresh air, enjoy the view, and think about what it's doing to your body and your soul and your mind. And so that's what really business is about. Business is not about a race. And I learned that, not the hard way, but when I was a young man, I wanted to be like, snap my fingers, I wanted to be the best, I wanted to make the most money, I wanted to run the world. All right? And then I realized years later that if you take it slow, pace yourself, go easy, learn. When you fail at something, learn from that failure. It's the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. There is a learning curve always. And if you approach business and your personal life like that, I think you'll have a fuller life and you'll be able to look at things much, much more crystal clear.
And probably more appreciative to everything you are getting back and for everything you are doing and how you are paying back to the society, to your community. And it makes
not to interrupt, but that's a whole nother conversation, because when you're young and you're building a business, you're building a career, you have maybe a family, you have young children, maybe you don't, but you don't have time to enjoy what's around you. You really don't. But what they found, that as people get older in life, things become more important, like giving back, having meaning, all of those things. And I found that as I was growing my business, I took a deep breath and I'm like, there's a world in front of us. There's nature. There's beauty in everything that's around us. Are we really looking at it? And most people don't. We don't, because we have blinders on.
And like you said, when I was young, I had 3 jobs, and I worked every weekend. So
I did. But that was old school. Today is new school.
Yeah, today children come to their parents and they say, hey, I don't want to work a weekend. Can you help me out here?
Well, I remember my first job, I was about, I think it was 13, 12 and a half. And I was sleeping. It was a Saturday morning around 11 o'clock in the morning. And my dad woke me up. He goes, get dressed. And he brought me to an Army-Navy store in the neighborhood. and he introduced me to the owner, and I got hired that day in retail. And so the guy said, his name was Al, and he said, all right, go into the stock room and check in this merchandise. And I did that for about an hour, and then it got busy. And he called me out. He goes, kid, get on the floor and sell. And I'm like, what? And I never looked back. I never went back into that stock room. At 16, I was the buyer for his store.
Ooh.
I was running his store. He was never there. He had a son-in-law that I was working with. I was just finishing high school, and I worked in retail all through college. And it taught me, look, again, my father was someone that worked. He was a union worker. He was blue collar. He worked. And I didn't, I always say he wasn't like the typical dad that I would see on television back then, like, father knows best. They're smoking a pipe and they're wearing, a cardigan. My father was at School of Old Knocks, and he'd give me a tap in the head. But I realized years later that my father taught me by doing, not by his words, because his words really, he didn't know how to really express himself, but it was in his actions. I learned how to be a good person. I learned how to give back. I learned how to work hard. Even though growing up, I thought it was insane. I'm like, that guy's crazy. Why would I want to do this? But I did it, and, I learned from it. And it was a lesson that, like I said, it took me many, many years to really understand it. But finally I got it, and the rest, again, is history. It's been a good guiding, it's been a road that I've traveled through him teaching me, but through actions.